Shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Please be seated. Switching up the order a little bit. I apologize if we sometimes do the lifting and covering of the Torah scroll, but we're gonna save that for after my talk. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. I don't remember when exactly it happened to me, but at some point in early adolescence, I realized that I had an issue with the well-known expression used to conclude so many of the children's stories I had heard growing up. It was likely in a blinding flash of teenage angst that I recognized the words, "And so they lived happily ever after," as an unfortunate ruse perpetrated on children by a misguided adult world. I saw how this short but potent phrase could set young human beings up for a life of disappointment, falsely grounded in the hope that eventually they would cross some threshold into that everlasting fairy tale perfection of which so many stories, songs, and movies have been made. As I grew older, I came to understand that not only were these words a setup for disappointment, but that the vision they evoked of a good and meaningful life was completely off the mark, in that it pointed away from rather than toward the experience of confronting and overcoming challenges as the engine that drives human growth and fulfillment. When I began a more serious study of Judaism in my early 20s, one of the first things I noticed was how very differently our tradition approached the meaning of challenge and struggle. How it attributed to that process an absolutely foundational role in human efforts to move in the direction, to move in the direction of truth, goodness, and meaning. I saw that Jewish tradition, instead of trying to eradicate the reality of ambiguity and complexity in human life, in fact, placed it at the very center of spiritual growth. We don't have to look far to see just a few of the many examples of this perspective preserved in our textual tradition. In this morning's Torah reading, we saw an excerpt from the complex life of Abraham and Sarah. First, the delight at the birth of Isaac, the long-awaited, divinely promised child, is intertwined with the resentment and maybe even hatred that Sarah clearly feels toward Hagar and Ishmael. Feelings that ultimately lead an aggrieved Abraham to reluctantly send Hagar and his firstborn son out into the wilderness to what would have seemed like almost certain death. Tomorrow's more famous Torah reading represents another illustration of Judaism's ambiguity and complexity. In this story, commonly known as the binding of Isaac, God inexplicably appears to be undermining the very promise that brought Isaac into Abraham and Sarah's life in the first place by commanding Abraham to offer Isaac up as a sacrifice on Mount Moriah. Even though the biblical text and much of later Jewish tradition read this story as the ultimate test of divine obedience that Abraham presumably passes, we must also note that the fallout from this so-called test has a cascading and destructive effect on multiple generations of the founding Israelite family. No sign of happily ever after in these texts. And these two stories are merely the tip of the complexity iceberg within our tradition, which collectively convey some important life lessons. First, that committing to follow a vision towards a transformative goal will never be an easy path. And second, that the choice to move forward towards that kind of goal is never a definitive one, but in fact has to be made over and over again, because each time we encounter an obstacle, we are presented with the option of turning around, heading back to where we started, and abandoning our commitment to reaching for a better future for ourselves and our world. This is not an easy truth to embrace, but it is a crucial one. We are never done with striving to make things better. Our promised land, whatever form that takes for us, will always be, at least, just a little further down the road. And this reality operates on all levels of human life, from the individual and the family, all the way up to that of society and our planet. It is also true at the level that brings us all together here this morning, that of our particular and precious religious community. Our beloved Kohalev community was brought into existence 3 decades ago by a combination of passionate, thoughtful, and dedicated members of Northeast Ohio Jewish households, and the vision of our founding Rabbi Jeffrey Schein and his wife Dr. Deb Schein. The core group that gathered at the Scheins' home for a series of meetings and conversations in late 1992 and early 1993 aimed to establish a spiritual home in this region for those who were seeking those who were seeking a Jewish environment that would embrace complete intellectual integrity as a religious value and support its integration with meaningful ritual, a commitment to social justice, an openness to spiritual seeking, and the cultivation of authentic strands of connection among its members. At the very outset of this 30-year journey, the emphasis was on adult learning. But this soon expanded to programs aimed at children and young families, regular gatherings for prayer and celebration on Shabbat and holidays, and community social action projects. Yet undergirding all of these activities was a focus on members getting to know one another and on members contributing in one way or another to the overall well-being of the community by organizing events, by helping to lead various programs, by volunteering to host activities in their homes, by participating on committees that were developing our institutional infrastructure. There was a tremendous amount of positive energy and excitement, and yes, there were also challenges and difficulties. But those who were members of the founding generation were not deterred by the challenges and difficulties, nor have those of us been who have come after them. Because there was always an understanding that the blessings of building our community far outweigh the challenges, and that the challenges themselves would turn into blessings if we could embrace the growth they were pushing us towards. At the very foundation of every flourishing community is an awareness of the importance of its members feeling connected to one another. The thicker the web of connection that gets woven between members, the more energy is available for growth and deepening for everyone, and the more resilience is generated to be able to overcome and persevere through challenging times. This web of connection is not something that can be invested in on a one-time basis and then left alone to develop on its own momentum, but rather requires consistent attention and cultivation in order to remain vibrant and generative. It's clear to me that historically, the leaders and members of our community have understood the critical role of attending to this process. And the thickness of the weave of relationships within Kol Halev is one of the central reasons that we were able to meet the unprecedented challenge of a pandemic and, for the most part, maintain a meaningful sense of connection to one another and to the community we've come to cherish. And yet, as challenging as the COVID era has been for us, I think that we were headed towards a critical reckoning with our future even before the pandemic started. I believe this is something that many of us sensed on some level, but that we were reluctant to address head-on. Now, though, because the impact of COVID has exacerbated and accelerated a previously existing cycle of renewal that was already in process, that reluctance to discuss it has been steadily dissolving. It has been replaced by the recognition that we are standing at an important, a powerful, and perhaps slightly unnerving inflection point in our shared collective life. We are now, not unlike the Israelites having made a miraculous escape across the sea, facing the new challenge of entering an unexplored wilderness, or, like Abraham and Sarah, having received an unlikely gift in the form of a new baby, deliberating over what changes must occur in our family, or not, in order to nurture the baby's health and growth. This moment of challenge, this unexplored wilderness, this inflection point is indicated by telltale signs that some of the most basic processes related to the well-being of our community have seemed to suffer over the past several years. Most notably, the percentage of our membership who are actively participating in or helping to organize any aspect of community life has been steadily diminishing, as has our ability to recruit members to serve in roles that many of us would normally define as essential. This is not the case uniformly across the community, but it is an overarching trend that I think is undeniable. For an organization that is predicated on volunteer energy and leadership, this stands as a clear message that our collective life is calling out for attention in a fundamental way. I want to emphasize that I do not intend these words in any fashion as a criticism of the path we have walked to this point. Rather, they represent an observation that I feel is important to put before all of us now as we discern together where we are and where we aspire to be heading into the future. The important question is, how will we respond to this challenge and this opportunity? This is a question that will likely have to be answered at two different levels: at the level of our organization's leadership and at the level of the hearts and minds of each of us, of each member of our community. Institutionally, we must provide more opportunities for various subsets of our community to gather and spend time together, ideally in person, with public health conditions permitting. And we must convene the conversations and create the spaces which give us a chance to step back and reflect together on which categories of Jewish experience are most important and energizing to us at this moment, as well as revisiting the vision and the core values that have animated our collective aspirations over these past 30 years. We must determine to what extent they still feel representative of who we are, and to what extent they may need to shift in order to better reflect the current makeup of our community. I expect that deliberations around how to set these kinds of conversations in motion will start soon after the fall holidays. As Reconstructionist Jews, we should challenge ourselves to embrace Mordechai Kaplan's teaching about the inevitability and the value of tradition being reconstructed from one generation to the next. We know this is true for Jewish culture writ large, and why wouldn't it also be the case for our particular little corner of that culture? At the level of the individual heart and mind, I am asking that we look at ways of moving back into greater community participation and connection with one another and more generally. This has always been the foundation of the secret sauce that has made Kol Halev the special place we know it to be. We are familiar with how quickly physical muscles can atrophy when someone has to remain in bed for an extended period of time, and the very same process can affect a community that is under similar conditions prevented from exercising its relational muscles. The COVID era, especially the initial 2 years, was a significant impediment for us and for many communities for exercising those vital muscles. I think we have done an excellent job of using the online tools we had access to in very creative ways. This allowed us to maintain a level of connection to each other that would otherwise not have been possible. And it seems that we've discovered along the way that there are even some activities that appear to work at least as well in a virtual format as they do when everyone's in person. But those tools were never really meant to take the place of the deeper relational energy that's quite differently present when we are meeting in the same physical space. Nor are they set up to facilitate the kinds of spontaneous conversations and mutual sharing that would happen regularly in the context of our pre-pandemic gatherings. We know that there are some members of our community for whom connecting virtually is the only option available. And there's no question in my mind about the importance of maintaining that option for those who need it. But it's equally clear to me that meeting the challenge of renewing our community and moving it into its next phase of unfolding will require an investment of time and energy on the part of a significant percentage of our members to show up both literally and figuratively with and for one another. There are many different options available to those of us who are drawn to actively supporting and advancing this process. To name just a few examples, we can choose to attend and even participate in leading Shabbat and holiday celebrations, or educational events, or social justice initiatives. We can choose to linger a little while when a formal event has ended and see what spontaneous conversational opportunities may present themselves. And getting back to eating together more often would help substantially with that, I think. We can choose to participate in whatever community conversations may be in store in the near future, and be willing to share our hopes and vision for who we might aspire to be in the next stage of our existence. We can choose to show up at a Shiva gathering for a fellow member who's going through a loss, or help provide a meal for another member who's facing circumstances that prevent them from shopping or cooking for themselves, even if we don't know them all that well. All of these event-centered opportunities are predicated on the assumption that we have members who are willing to show up in a different, complementary way in roles that support and enable that wide range of activities to take place. We need people who choose to serve as greeters for all events held in this building. We will need people, excuse me, we will need people who choose to help out with Zoom hosting. We will need people who choose to help get us back to having Kiddush on Shabbat on a more regular basis. We will need people willing to open their homes as venues for discussions and singing and learning. And we will need people who choose to help revive some of our important committees that have languished for far too long. I know this may sound like a long and daunting list of needs to be addressed. And I want to underscore that no one person can be expected to take on more than a small part of it. But it will undoubtedly take all of us together to create the momentum and the vision that will enable us to move our community forward. I want to be very clear about my intention in sharing these reflections on this sacred day of birth and renewal. It is emphatically not bad news. We might think it was if we were part of the happily ever after school of community building. But from the perspective of our 4,000-year-old tradition, this moment is a natural part of our organizational life cycle. And more than anything, it presents an opportunity for growth, for deepening, and for a renewal of our collective energies. I, for one, feel excited about and inspired by the great potential for learning and transformation that the challenge of this moment offers to us. And I hope many of the rest of you do as well. We have some significant work to do together in the coming months and years. But I am confident that we will rise to this occasion, and in doing so, rediscover and reconnect with the sources of vitality and possibility that first brought this community into being and will certainly carry us forward into the future if we allow them to. There is a modern version of the traditional prayer for travelers written by Debbie Friedman, may her memory be for a blessing, that we often use at moments of poignant transition and hope. And I'd like to invite all of you now, in that same spirit, to join me in singing it as a first step in setting our collective intention for the next phase of our journey together. It can be found on the supplement at number 9. Blessed as we go on our way. May we be guided in peace. May we be blessed with health and joy. May this be our blessing. So sorry. Shana Tova, Shabbat Shalom, good Yontif, and good Shabbos.